I wanted to do that for all of my career. And that's what private equity helps me do. It is to look at a lot of information, some of it which contradicts itself, and to try to learn as much as possible about how good a business is and what its future potential is. And along with many other smart people, help to make a decision on whether we invest. And if we do invest, how to help that company get to the best possible version of itself.
Hello and welcome to the BLK podcast. My name is EOL. I'm a research equity analyst at BLK. Today, we're going to have Zach Elliott introduce our guests. But as a disclaimer, all the opinions stated on this podcast are of the analysts and of the guests and not of BLK. And they're not supposed to represent BLK or its sponsors. The BLK podcast is supposed to enrich, educate, and aggregate our internal and external community. So without further ado, Zach.
Hello guys, my name is Zach. I'm a first year student studying at Imperial College London in the UK, and I'm now the Chief Strategy Officer at BLK. Today, our guest is Melekot Abate, a private equity senior associate in the healthcare sector at Goldman Sachs. Mr. Abate is a Princeton graduate who has worked for the likes of Google, Mckinsey Co. So Melekot, how's your week been?
You know, it's a Friday that you're catching me, so it's the best time. Spring is springing. I'm sitting in New York. The flowers are coming to life. Whatever I talk about also only represents my opinions and not that of my employer, which you guys will both see as you join institutions. They're very particular about sort of saying.
Great. So the life outside the office, I guess, is a balance that you like to strike well at Goldman. So there's some the outside the parks, that kind of thing which you like to do. I mean, I know in New York you've got quite a few parks around, right?
Yeah, I mean, COVID has obviously thrown a wrench in a bunch of, what we like to do for fun in a great city like New York. But whenever not working, it's, nice to get out for a run. There's a park near my house in Brooklyn. There's rooftops for the sunshine. So, we do what we can. Work is important, but it's not everything.
This seems to be a trend, I think, actually. I've just finished a spring week at Goldman. It seems to me that every single employee at Goldman seems to be a runner. Is that true?
Sorry, every employee seems to be a what?
A runner. Be a runner in their free time.
A runner, yes. It's when you're working sort of many hours and sort of demanding jobs, I think it could be hard to participate in the sorts of team sports where like you or other people have to rely on each other's schedules. I mean, I play squash, I play other things as well, but running is great. It clears the mind. Our office in New York is right by the West Side Highway, which is a phenomenal place to run. And yeah, I think people are very competitive. So it makes sense. Do you run?
Yeah, I actually do. I'm an athlete in my free time. Yeah, so at the moment we're kind of going through injury, but I mean in the past I've kind of represented England a couple of times. In my event's actually 400 hurdles, but I do a bit of long jump, dabble around in those events as well, track and field.
Hey.
But I'm guessing you must have done some kind of sports while you're at Princeton as well.
Yeah, I mean, so, like Yoel, I come from Ethiopia and running is in our genes. So, I think I'm a good runner anywhere else in the world, but in my country, I'm below average. My distances growing up were 800 meter. I used to do cross country as well, 5K, 10K. Never been fast enough to do anything that's under 800.
All right.
Yeah. I was about to say something we all have in common is just, running. I don't know if that speaks to investing and like how runners and investors may think, but, there might be some similarities there.
I think so. I think that, getting a course in mind and setting a goal and getting after it, that's what it's about. Running, investing, but really, truly, a lot of other things in life as well. I'm sure you're both much better athletes than I am, but I'm humbled that you put me in the same class.
Mm-hmm. And so you touched a little bit on your background and being a runner and being obviously your Ethiopian heritage. Can you tell us a little bit about that?
Yeah, certainly. So I was born in Ethiopia, grew up across the African continent as well as Yemen, which is in the Middle East. My parents were diplomats, so I was lucky to have a childhood that was very interesting and varied. But my goal has always been, to be the best version of myself that I can be. I was inspired by my dad and by my mom, who worked very hard to beat the odds, and then to bring other people along with me, because so many people have helped me. And so, from Ethiopia, I ended up at Princeton in the U.S. To attend my university studies. And from there, I joined McKinsey, where I began my career in all things business. And after doing sort of 2 years of New York based, pretty classic McKinsey stuff, one of my proudest achievements was helping to open the McKinsey Ethiopia office in Addis Ababa in 2014. So, the continent, the African continent, and people of the African diaspora outside of the continent are always very close to what I try to do and who I try to help and be helped by.
Yeah, definitely. That's really amazing. I didn't even know that Mackenzie had an office in Ethiopia. So how do you
Yeah,
think? Oh, I'm sorry.
go ahead, go ahead.
No, I was just gonna ask, how do you think growing up in Ethiopia and in the Middle East made you or taught you certain lessons some of your peers at Princeton may have not had growing up?
One thing you notice when you go to a place like Princeton, where a majority of the students come from a particular socioeconomic strata within the United States, is that their worldview is very cushioned and it's very comfortable because, I don't want to generalize, right? That's not everyone at Princeton. And I loved my time at Princeton. It was eye opening for me. But one thing I noticed very early on was, folks who come from the East Coast or the West Coast of the United States, or if they're international, if they come from a developed country where they, like London, where they went to, private school, it's different to if you grow up in a developing country. And so one thing I learned in Yemen very early when I went to an international school is the world is much bigger than my village, right? And I went to an elementary school where there was only 200 students, but there were 70 nationalities represented. So that tells you very early on, oh my God, I am just one of many different ways of being, many different ways of dressing, of speaking, of eating. And that's an appreciation that I think, serves well in the rest of life. I think once people get to college and they start to meet people from around the world, they start to appreciate it in time. But I felt very lucky to get exposure to that from early on.
Yeah, and I think you touch upon the idea of diversity being kind of like the integrating factor with all that we do, really. And the more you can kind of expose yourself to all these different experiences, I mean you going to school in Yemen, meeting all these different people, having to, I guess, expose yourself to a new language as well, was it?
Yes, yeah, yeah, absolutely. My native tongue that the UL speaks as well is Amharic, which is an old Semitic language. Funny story. When we moved to Yemen, I was 10 years old and I hadn't really spoken English, definitely not well at the time. And one day my dad came home, maybe a month before we moved, and he said, from this day on, everybody in this house speaks English. This was terrifying because we didn't speak any English. So as soon as we heard his car approaching, we'd run to the bedroom and just pretend to go to sleep. That was a sort of horror of having to sort of learn a new language from scratch. But going to an international school where you just end up, making friends and you're playing, football on the field, or you're running together or what have you, you learn things very quickly. So not only English, but then I got the chance to learn Arabic as well, at a very early age. You pick up a lot when you're young. You guys are still very young. You can probably still learn Mandarin, or probably whatever other important language there are to learn today.
Yeah,
Yeah,
no, definitely.
I think one language, a bit of an alternate language, which lots of people are trying to get into at the moment, myself included, is coding. And trying to wrap my head around coding at the moment, it's like no language I've ever tried to learn before. It's like it's a bit of maths, it's a bit of remembering all these different words. But yeah, have you ever tried to learn coding yourself?
Zach, I mean, you touch on probably my biggest insecurity, which is that the new language is that of coding, and I am, I am illiterate. I don't know the first thing about coding. I think I can make a stretch and say, listen, some of the financial modeling we do in Excel is writing some sort of language, but it really isn't. I think learning how computers think and speak, and telling them to do stuff, that's what everybody has to learn, and I feel woefully underprepared.
Well, yeah, I guess this is the real kind of evolution we're seeing in finance right now, where it's more like this coding side, and there's this kind of transition towards, I guess the whole world is transitioning towards coding, and this crypto market which is exploding at the moment. But what were your kind of first interests in the finance side of things? I mean, going to Princeton, and what kind of took your sights onto to Mckinsey and then eventually onto finance?
Certainly. Let me start by saying your listeners, whom I assume are similar to you, who are interested in finance already in college, you already have a leg up. My experience with finance was that I came into it a little bit later in my educational journey. I studied international relations because I've always been interested in how the world works, and I figured public service and working in public institutions was maybe the best way to do that. In time, I realized that actually what makes the world go around is global commerce, right? It is people making goods and services in different parts of the world, and meeting the needs and the desires of customers, both businesses as well as consumers all over. Um, and I thought that was fascinating, especially coming from a country that was still recovering from communism and still trying to find its way into sort of market driven prosperity. I mean, don't get me wrong, the market has many, many flaws, and we've seen them time and again. And most recently in COVID, we see how poorer countries as well as poorer communities in rich countries suffer disproportionately. So certainly the market doesn't have all the answers. But what I find really empowering about it is all the countries, especially the Asian tigers, who the power of commerce have been able to lift living standards, have been able to sort of go from poor to middle income, from middle income to rich. And so for me, thinking about how does this happen, of course, first and foremost, it happens with smart, driven, talented entrepreneurs and people with ideas. But what empowers them is capital, right? And if you have a great idea, but you don't have access to, whether it's seed capital or growth funding or debt, then you can't build a good business. And if you can't build a good business, you can't hire people, economies don't run. And that's the sort of fundamental reason that I was interested in business when I started McKinsey, and over time, more specifically in the financial sector as well.
Yeah. And I think this is like something a lot of people are starting to realize as well, because I feel like that's something parallel to my own interest in finance. Because, I came from a household of like, everyone's a doctor, I need to go into medicine. So for the majority of my life up until recently, I was pursuing something in that medical field. And then it took me a summer in Ethiopia where I was like shadowing a surgeon to realize, instead of physically helping one person at a time, giving them my ultimate attention, I could focus on maybe building one hospital at a time, extrapolating that out, and then just seeing how that growth could potentially help more people.
Yeah, UL, I think you hit on something great, which is impact at the sort of at a more individual or on a custom basis, or impact at scale. And these things are not necessarily mutually exclusive, right? Plenty of people start their careers in one, and eventually, as they grow, they find ways to sort of, reach more people. I think finance is cool, and finance is a big field, and we can get into it, but finance generally is cool because it can get to scale. It can be very much at scale. But I have to be honest. I mean, you're probably smart enough to be a doctor for sure, and Zach, smart enough to be whatever you want to be. I wasn't smart enough to be a doctor or a lawyer, so thank God that I found a field that my talents were actually well suited to. But I get the point of, especially parents from immigrant backgrounds who want their children to be engineers, lawyers, doctors. I mean, these are three fantastic things. But I think engineers, doctors, and lawyers ultimately still need capital. They still need finance. They still need leadership in business. And so I think this is a really cool field.
Yeah, well, 100% agree. Because I mean, you can have the best engineers in the world, but if there's no management or, like you say, capital to go around to fund those great ideas, and unfortunately, they never come into reality, right? And I think that's really what my interest in finance has been as well. Kind of my background is mechanical engineering at university, and my decision actually majoring that in the first place was to do with like the sustainability that's going on at the moment. I know, in fact, in Ethiopia, they've got some great projects going on to do with hydroelectric power and that kind of side as well. And you've probably got your own opinions on that side as well. But yeah, I think it's just great that we can kind of facilitate this growth, this movement towards, say, a more sustainable world and a more accessible um, global opportunity base. And if we can do that through allocating capital to where it needs to be, then that's the perfect way to get there. But I guess that really kind of brings me on to the point of, like, so you mentioned that you came onto finance maybe a little bit later than others, and of course starting at McKinsey, being at this humongous kind of institution where you're able to kind of take your ideas wherever you want them to be, have the kind of impact that you want to have. It must have been pretty difficult to kind of have that thought about stepping away from that and then re-establishing your career in a different kind of field. So perhaps what actually was that point in time where you decided, right, okay, consulting isn't what I want to do long term, and I'm going to go back to college and then re-study for finance?
Right. What's interesting about McKinsey is it very much pitches itself as a training ground, as a, if you're doing it coming out of college, as a furthering of your studies, but more rooted in the sort of the real world. And I always approached it as the place I would go and test various hypotheses, right? What industries excite me? What functions am I, you want to get to in life, the intersection between things that are needed and that there's demand for, things that you are good at and care about, and ideally also, things that are rewarding to the extent that, both, spiritually, mentally, as well as financially. Um, and so I treated McKinsey as an opportunity to learn more about the world of business. And what I found was, I was most excited working for, investor clients, because I thought they were motivated to make decisions, actual decisions. I think at McKinsey sometimes and I should be very clear, I speak for myself and not the institution, but in my individual experience, we did a lot of really interesting and good work when I was there. But I found that working with investors, the decisions were faster. It felt more impactful. It felt like the answers were, feeding some real life consequences. I also enjoyed the healthcare and technology sectors. In the United States, healthcare is maybe 35% of GDP or higher. Every year it grows. It's obviously important, everyone keeping alive and healthy, and we've seen that more than ever in the last year. And it's also very complex. It's a very complex sector, especially in the US. And so, that excited me intellectually. And also, it's a place where you need to lower the cost and get to better outcomes. Um, Technology, because it's a force multiplier across whatever sector you're working in. Zach, you're an engineer, so you're probably more technically capable. I come at it more from a user, and how can we lower the cost of care in healthcare? How can we reach more people? How can we use big data to get to insights faster? And so on and so forth. And that has applicability across the board. So these were the two things that I thought from an industry perspective were exciting. And I thought investing, brings together a lot of disciplines, right? When you invest, especially I'm in private equity. So in private equity, you actually sort of own the business. You act like a business owner because you are. So you need to understand strategy. What is this business selling? What is its reason to exist, right? How can you get better? And then you have to care about operations, because at the end of the day, like, the bills have to be paid, the products have to be made, they have to be sold, you have to build a customer, and so on and so forth. And then, of course, finance itself, right? Like, so much about the capital structure of a company and how efficiently it uses its investors' money, as well as money it gets from banks and other lenders, is critical to the financial performance of the company. And then, of course, underlying it all, there's a very human element, which is interacting with management teams, interacting with customers, suppliers, financiers, and so on and so forth. And I thought that part of it is also really exciting. So I thought McKinsey was a place where I developed the sort of the taste and the insights to figure out this is where I want to take my career in the long term.
Wow, yeah. And so tell us about that first day in the office at Goldman then. What was going through your mind on that first day?
Interestingly, the first day was right here in my living room at my dining table, looking into my screen, having started, in September of 2020, in the thick of the pandemic. But what's really cool is, and again, similarly here, I don't speak for Goldman, I speak just for myself. But my first day on the job is, most investing firms have what they call a Monday morning meeting. And a Monday morning meeting is when everyone sort of gets on. In old days, it would be in a conference room. Now it's on Zoom and talks about, what are we looking at? What are the deals? It's a deal business, right? The thing you want to know is what's going on. What are we evaluating? And so the first thing was just like a global team based in New York, London, Hong Kong, everybody talking about the cool and interesting things they're working on, not just in healthcare, but in technology and consumer and industrials. And all these faces, very diverse, and talking about, their worlds. I thought that was really cool. And then you get questions that are thrown from sort of more junior staff to the senior investment professionals that are presenting. And I was very struck by the sort of the openness of it. And so that was it. That was the first day at work. But as you know, if you've started a new job or a new internship anywhere, you're just like, hey, like, how can I set up my email? How can I set up my technology? There's 100 faces on this screen. Am I ever going to learn their names? There's very human emotions on that first day. And you're not thinking so much about, how you're going to crush the job yet. You're just trying to, survive.
Yeah. Just rewinding a bit. After your time at Mckinsey, is that when you went to Google, and then from there, did you go on to Goldman, or what was the trajectory
Certainly.
from you?
People in finance, especially in the US, have euphemisms for things. They call it a quote unquote non-traditional background. And when they say non-traditional background, all that means is you didn't start with 2 years of investment banking and then do immediately 2 years of private equity and then do 2 years of business school, sort of. And I think while many people come through this path, I think it's unnecessarily restricting, because if you think about what it takes to be a good investor, the first and most important thing is the ability to think analytically and critically. And whether you're a student of engineering or someone who is approaching medicine, analytical thinking is something that comes from many different fields. The second thing that's really important is having an understanding of how business works. And a career in consulting, a career in banking, or a career in business can give you that, And then the third is just having the discipline, the focus, and the energy to be able to, dedicate the time needed to understand something. So for me, after McKinsey, I was interested in tech, and I went to Google because Google has an investing arm, a small investing arm. I wanted to join eventually with it, to do investing in technology and developing markets. It didn't quite work out that way. Sometimes it happens like that in your career. You get there and the organization is different, or it's more bureaucratic than you anticipated. And so what I actually did after Google, after 1 year, a phenomenal year, but one where I felt my talents weren't being used to the best of their potential. Google is an engineering organization. I'm not an engineer. Was I went to a small startup, which is a small investment bank called Cross Boundary in Nairobi. And that was exciting because we're building a finance business from the ground up. And, developing markets, there's increasing private equity transactions. And wherever there's transactions, you need M&A, merger and acquisition advisors. And that's what I did for 3 years. I thought it was amazing. It was amazing to build something from the bottom up. It was amazing to provide a service that's really needed. But then, 3 years was a long time. And ultimately, I decided to go back to school. So I pursued my MBA at Harvard Business School. And that was just to take it to the next level, right? So you've spent 5 or 6 years working really hard, learning a lot. And then you come to a place where there's 900 other people 900 other people. Some come from the military, some are startup founders, some were teachers, many were bankers or consultants, to be sure. And then they come from the four corners of the world. So it's a chance to come together and, sort of take a break for 2 years and figure out what have we been learning. What did you see? What did you learn about leadership? Where do you think the next innovations are coming from? What excites you? Hey, do you want to start this company with me today, in 5 years, in 10 years? That's what excited me to go to business school after working for roughly 6 years. And that was the next chapter, was the Harvard Business School.
Wow, yeah. And so you touched a little bit about the reason why you wanted to go to the business school, to find out what excited you. So did you ever find the answers to that question then?
I so far I have, it's been almost a year since I graduated, and I realized that, the question of, hey, what do you want to be when you grow up, is probably a lifelong pursuit. But what I did learn about myself is that actually I love being surrounded by really smart people and trying to solve complex problems every single day. The format of HBS is, the case study. And the case study is basically, you get, in every one of your classes, you get a big business problem. And it's told from the point of view of the entrepreneur or the manager or the operator, right? And so it puts you in the shoes of, hey, how am I going to sell more insulin to hospital, something that's actually critical, or something fun, like there's a new energy drink that I want to introduce to gym buffs like you guys, right? So where do I find these people? What do I price at? How do I brand to them? These are real business problems, right? And every single day you're faced with a multitude of data points, some of which conflict with each other. And your job is to synthesize the information that you have and talk to the smart people around you and get to the best possible answer. I wanted to do that for all of my career. And that's what private equity helps me do. It is to look at a lot of information, some of it which contradicts itself, and to try to learn as much as possible about how good a business is and what its future potential is. And along with many other smart people, help to make a decision on whether we invest. And if we do invest, how to help that company get to the best possible version of itself.
Well, yeah, no, that's a great definition of private equity, because I feel like, when we just speak about finance or investing banking or private equity, there's a lot of ambiguity. Some things are just unclear. So I feel like that explanation was really well put.
Thank you. I've had many different chances and 50,000 different interviews. You will learn as you interview for jobs. I mean, you guys have started early in your lives, but you learn as you do for jobs. You try to find 10 different words you can rearrange to answer the same question.
Yeah.
Oh, that's an interesting one. Yeah. You tend to always hear that with politicians on the TV as well, isn't it?
Yeah, we're all politicians of some kind.
Yeah.
Ooh, I like that. So, how would you say your experience at Goldman in the private equity team has gone so far since September?
Yeah, I would say that it's a very busy time in the world right now. What's interesting is the first few months of COVID were a time of uncertainty. I mean, first and foremost for our families and the people that we love and communities everywhere, right? I mean, more than anything, this is a health crisis. But then, a close second is the economy, because, folks need to work and they need to eat. And I think in rich countries like the US or the UK with massive government stimulus, I think the worst was sort of avoided. And then eventually, by sort of Q4 of last year, of 2020, the markets were very frothy, by which we mean there's a lot of deal activity. A lot of good businesses not have only survived, but they've thrived. Capital markets are very vibrant because of the massive stimulus program by the US government. The federal funds rate is close to 0%, which means capital is extremely cheap. So what you have is great companies that have proven a business model that works with the new world we live in. You have a lot of motivated people who took 3 or 4 months to not really invest. So there's a lot of pent up demand. And then you have access to low cost capital, which means when you finance your deals, just like if you were to buy a house, if the interest rate is at 0%, then of course you're going to go get a mortgage, right? That's what it is like for private equity as well, right? You're getting access to debt at basement bargain terms. So to answer your question, it's been very busy. It's been very exciting. We look at a lot of businesses every week. We look at multiple businesses, and the challenges are we're still in a remote environment. I work from home. I think it was 3 or 4 months before I met any of my colleagues in person, right? And so that can be a little. I really love the people that I work with just based on Zoom, but I don't think there's any way to replicate this sort of human in-person interaction. So that part of it is a challenge. But looking at multiple deals in consumer and technology and healthcare and being a part of the exciting times of the market is great. Also being in healthcare, being very close to the innovation that's happening to save people's lives. That part of it has been exciting as well.
Yeah. And you speak about the part of your job in terms of speaking to these founders, and often, like, I don't know the sizes of the businesses that you're working with, but many of these founders will have come from kind of like the small, like, foundations of their business, whether it's at university or beyond. And it's almost like, I mean, I've really seen this with a couple businesses I've looked at. It's like this business is almost like their own child, and like how they've got to this point in time where they've nurtured it up and they put so much effort. It's running the business is really, really like a 24/7 job, isn't it? Really, you're always on the ball, and you're always trying to find where the next opportunity is. And I guess you'll see that through your job every day. So, what would you say you've learned from perhaps your clients as well, and how have you kind of interacted that maybe in the role you're doing now?
Zach, that's a very good question. For the brilliant, risk-taking, hardworking people who found companies, that is 100%, a 200% dedication. So you rightly point out that they're very committed, and they very much are motivated by not just capital, but they're motivated by having a kick-ass product or service. They're motivated by being their customers very happy. They're motivated by growth. There's a lot. Um, there are many elements within private equity sort of based on the stage of business, right? So in growth equity, when you're doing non-control deals, which means you're buying sort of a portion or a stake in the company, then most of the time it's a founder-owned business or founder-led business. A little bit later, in more classic LBO, which is a sort of leveraged buyout, which is where I sit, you have more mature companies. You have companies that have probably existed for 10, 20, 30 years and have a long history of being profitable and cash positive, which means they may have transitioned from their original founders, and they may have quote unquote professional CEOs. But those CEOs too have probably they usually have a meaningful stake in the company economically in the sort of shares, and they are very motivated by the things that I mentioned earlier. So you have to understand what motivates the person you're speaking to. You have to understand, what they are looking to from you. Capital by itself is not differentiated. you know, there are many investors in the world. There are many smart investors in the world. And increasingly, what's a little bit tougher is finding the sort of the quality asset to buy. So a little bit more of the power is now amongst the investees than it is amongst the investors. So you have to understand what it is that you bring to the table as an investor that is unique and differentiated to the founder, to the CEO, that the next 15 private equity firms don't bring. And that part of, I'm still a relatively junior or mid-level investment professional, but as you become more senior and as you become a managing director or partner, then you get to spend a lot more time thinking about those things. And I can't wait for that.
Yeah, that was really well said. In the finance world, there's a term that everyone uses to use as a metric of success or success itself. So, how would you personally define success?
I think everyone should have their own, definition of success. I think truly, like, my number one definition of success is that, the people I love have the sort of the resources and the mental space to to do what makes them happy and to just, start every day with a smile. I mean, that sounds very amorphous and wide, and it is. But, I have found, I'm 33 now, which must seem like a dinosaur to you guys. But, I have found so far in life that real happiness comes from sort of everyday things and everyday interactions and, something that makes you smile. So I, for me, as well as the people I love, is my number one criteria of success. But so much of the meaning that we derive comes from our professions, right? So professionally in finance, my metric for success is, you know, have I gotten to the right answer about a business? Have I understood what is going to drive its growth? Where the products it produces or the services it produces are best fit? What problems do they actually solve, right? And then ultimately, how does that translate into, the growth numbers, right? So in finance, there's an all sort of important metric, EBITDA, which is earnings before interest, taxes, depreciation, amortization. Unnecessarily geeky. All it means is what is the operating financial performance of the company before you put in things like tax, the capital structure, interest, and so on and so forth, right? So essentially, does your business make money, right? A good business should make money. Now, growth stage businesses need a lot of investment to get to the potential that they, where they are able to make the most amount of sort of profit that they can. So obviously, as an investor, I want to grow the EBITDA of the companies in my portfolio to the greatest extent possible. And that would mean that I've created a lot of, or that company has created a lot of value for its customers, for its employees, and for its investors, right? So that's the metric that tells us that. But it belies many, many other things that have to be right. Management teams that are motivated, employees that feel proud of the work that they do, products that solve real world problems that all eventually then create something that users love. And then sort of profits follow. So it's marrying those things that I think is a sort of the definition of professional success for me.
Yeah. And I guess success is a long road, like we spoke about. I mean, no one can really say where the line between going towards success and success is. And I mean, I guess it's finding that balance between always chasing like what you want to do and finding the next best thing. But then I guess also taking the time to appreciate that like there will come a time where you can look back and be proud of what you achieved and know at that point that you like have reached success. And I guess really I want to try and understand for you where that point might lie. So in the next, say, 10, 15 years, where do you see yourself, and like what do you reckon will be your path towards there?
Zach, it's a great question, and I understand your question to be, sort of how do you think about legacy? What's the long-term impact that you want to have? And I don't think it's ever too early to think about that. I think for me, so many people have helped me be on the path that I'm on. So many mentors, so many people who've invested their time and their energy and their resources. And, my most important metric of success outside of the sort of the happiness of my family and the loved ones that I talked about earlier is how many young professionals, especially those they come from communities that have been historically disenfranchised or underprivileged, whether those are, African Americans in the United States or females everywhere or ethnic minorities in Europe or large groups of people in Africa and Asia. How can I motivate and inspire and help people get to their potential, right? Because I know that the people who have helped me have given me the ability to help, 100 times more people. Right? There's a multiplier effect there. So I want to do in my day job as well as outside of work, I want to create a group of people who are motivated to bring other people up with them. I think this is the legacy that I would love to leave behind. And then in terms of investing per se, I want to build a track record. If you think about how private equity works, you make it unlike the public markets, you don't get instant feedback in how good you are because you invest in a company and it's usually 4 or 5 years before you're in a position to exit that investment, right? So there's a lag time between when you evaluate the investment and when, the chickens come home to roost. So I want to build a track record across several life cycles of funds that says, hey, I'm actually a good investor. Here are the mistakes that I've made and what I've learned from them. And here is a pattern recognition that says when you see A, B, C, and D, it generally indicates that you're looking at a good business with tremendous potential. I want to be able to develop that intuition because, from everything that I understand, it takes many years to sort of get to that place. And then, with both the financial rewards as well as the intellectual sort of horsepower that comes with that, I want to be able to apply that to, investing in sustainable businesses and looking for new ways for capital to solve some of the more pressing public and social issues that we have in the world as well. So I know that's a long-winded answer, but legacy to me is the impact that we have on people who are motivated and generally underprivileged. It's about getting really good at your job so that you can really excel at it, and so that you can use the capital and the knowledge that comes from that to solve social and public issues as well.
Yeah. And that was such a great elaborate answer that you just said there. So how would you like, what advice would you give to these young people that you're trying to inspire? Like, what advice would you give to enable them to be in a position that you're in now, where you want your legacy to be to help others?
I think probably the first and most important thing is just to figure out what it is that's at the intersection of what the world wants and what you're good at, right? I think people say pursue your passions. I think that's absolutely the case. But also, especially for, people of color and the underprivileged, I don't think we can always afford to only pursue our passions because we also live in a world where it rewards different things differently, right? So I think it's really important to figure out the intersection of what am I really good at and what is there a market for in the world. So that's the first thing, like do that journey of discovery. The second is talk to others who have done it before you, right? So that speaks to mentorship. No one person is ever going to be a template for you because guess what? If you want to be exactly like somebody else, that's a waste of a life because, all of us are unique individuals. But there's a lot of collective wisdom in the village, right? So all the elders, the 50 or the 100 people that you can draw inspiration from, talk to them, see what they have done because you can learn from the things they've done well and you can learn from the mistakes and, the screw ups that they've done as well. So, lower the cost to yourself by learning from others. And the third is like live life itself because it is really important to get after your dreams. It's really important to grind, put your head down, put the time in, while you're young, you still have energy and so on. But the people that you love, your family, your significant other, eventually when you have your own children, so on and so forth. I mean, these things are truly what life is ultimately about. So don't become a boring square with no interests and no relationships, because that doesn't help you. You could have millions in the bank and a fancy title, but if you have no one to enjoy or share that with, then it's kind of a bummer. So it's important to maintain that balance with life itself and the interest in the people in your life while you're busy getting after it.
Definitely. And I think one of life's greatest like challenges is always balancing those two lives in between. But I'm sorry, Zach, what were you gonna say?
No, yeah, I was gonna really echo what you said there, Hill. That like you say, like the three aspects that you touch on, and I think the one that we can kind of all relate to most at this stage in our lives, and I'm sure the others will hopefully become more visible as we kind of grow older, is the learning aspect. I mean, we're sitting at school all day trying to learn, get all this information. We're talking to you right now, trying to gain from your wisdom, and all these sources of information that we've got around us, and trying to be able to get them into this like small space, which is our brain, right? Which has got so many things, like you say, going on all around us. And I guess really, what one kind of place I've found refuge in trying to learn this thing as well is books. And I mean, I had the privilege really of only really started to read books at quite a late age. However, since I've started reading, I've picked up on so many different things. Like you say, you can just really lose yourself in a book, and I think that's something that's so amazing that kids can kind of get at a young age, and that's so amazing and such a great gift that you can have. So, if you had any book recommendations for the likes of the people who you want to inspire in the next generation, what would those book recommendations be?
Zach, I absolutely agree. I think books are a dream, and they're magic. And I think, the intellectual trajectory of, and I would say not just intellectual, I would say also spiritual and mental, sort of the things, being an all-rounded person. So the trajectory of someone who reads, one book a month versus someone who doesn't, it's the difference between a horizontal line of 180 degrees and one of, 45 degrees, which is what you want your intellectual trajectory to be, right? You always want to improve. You want to learn, to the earlier point about seeking the wisdom of others. That's what books do. They take you to a different world. They take you to a place of learning from others' experiences. So I actually recently read Shoe Dog by Phil Knight, who's the founder of Nike. And to be honest, usually I try to avoid quote unquote business books because in my limited leisure time, I try to sort of get lost in the world of fiction and in the world of sort of fantasy. But this was not like your typical sort of like textbook business book, right? And I see that Yoel is pulling up a copy of Shoe Dog. And my experience was, it was really inspiring to see an entrepreneur who sort of started with an idea and who's very frank about many of the failures that were in the way before he sort of got to excel, got to actually create this company that we all know today. And I thought it was a beautiful human story. And it also includes, personal tragedy. I won't ruin it for anyone who hasn't read the book yet, but I think it's equal parts inspiring because it shows us what we're all capable of. I also love to read a lot of works by young, authors from around the world, a lot from Africa. And my sister, actually, my younger sister, is a budding author. Her name is Karen Abate, so she will be publishing a book in the next year. So be on the lookout for her. But people like her. She models herself after folks like Chimamanda Adichie, who's a famous Nigerian writer, and she tells the stories of the sort of the global diaspora, and she talks about universal themes of belonging and finding ways to blaze trails in worlds we haven't been before. So I really love her book Americana, which is her famous book. Uh, but she also has a collection of short stories called The Thing Around Your Neck, which is nice bite-sized sort of like 30-page stories that take you to a particular world, and they're low commitment and high reward. So as an investor, I'm always looking for ways to maximize returns, and that's a great book for that. So I can go on for days, but those are the most recent books that I've really loved.
Yeah. And thank you so much for those fruitful suggestions. We'll definitely take you up on that, and I think our listeners will enjoy exploring those as well. But I just want to personally thank you so much for coming on the podcast. This was really an honor to speak with you and gain some insight. But yeah, thank you.
Yeah, Yoel and Zach, it's a pleasure to speak with you guys. I think you and your listeners are coming into the sort of the professional world at a very interesting time when technology and healthcare and innovation across a variety of spaces is making our world better. But we're also, the crisis that we live in is creating many challenges that my generation and your generation have to solve. So it's never too early to start, and I'm really happy to see you guys, getting after it. But also, you're still in college, so make sure to have fun, guys. When the choice is between studying for the fifth or sixth hour or going out and like kicking a ball around with the mates or going for a pint, the latter is the right answer.